Hi, everybody. So I've noticed that in spiritual terminology, there are some confusions about dimensions, densities, and vibrations. So I thought that I would share my own view or my own experience with these and what I think they mean or what they represent in spirituality. So for me, I've been journeying into parallel worlds for more than 15 years now, but I've only recently started to share my experiences with the parallel worlds in my books and during my lectures in Prague, Czechia, in Europe, and also in some interviews. And I also decided to make more videos to share my experiences. And when I travel to these parallel worlds, I use the method of inner journeying, I call it. So it's an alternative to astral projection, which can be quite tricky and even dangerous at times. And if you go through your own inner portal, then it's really safe, and you know that you remain always in the here and now, and you always return to your here and now whenever you want to come back. And during these journeys, I've experienced many dimensions, many realities, and some have different dimensions, some have different density. So just simply how I realized the differences between these is that a dimension is a certain space. So there can be many parallel 3D dimensions or three-dimensional worlds, many versions of this planet, for example. So I would call it like a parallel 3D world or a parallel 3D timeline. And that's a parallel dimension. And they experience time, but just a bit differently, maybe. It runs differently from ours. But then there are dimensions that are either a more narrower or a wider perception. So, for example, there are dimensions that are the fourth dimensional realities already work with time creatively. So time is perceived a bit differently, or actually quite it's quite different, not just a bit, because you can create your own time capsule, for example, or a time loop, or you can work with time in a creative way, similar to as here in 3D you can work with space creatively. In realities with broader, even more broader perceptions, such as the realities that already have abilities that are fifth dimensional or sixth dimensional, it's all even more creative. So for example, in realities that where people or beings work with their fifth dimensional abilities, they're able to create their own time and space, and they're able to create their own worlds. So that's what I call the prime reality, where we can already create our own worlds. Like in 3D we create our homes and we invite our dear ones to visit us. In fifth dimensional realities and a more broader realities such as sixth dimensional, you create your own world, like you create your own home, and those who are dear to you have your code, or your, like, they have a way to get there, and it's you teleport, or you basically travel with the power of thought. So if you think of that reality, you are there. If you think of that person, you are with that person, and so forth. But then there are also dimensions that are like more narrow in perception, but that doesn't mean that they are higher or lower in the human sense of hierarchy. For example, I find the two-dimensional world really interesting. For me, that's the dimension of the shapes, geometries, symbols, and runes that this reality is made of. So it's like made of. So it's like the 2D is like the building blocks for 3D. And each of these dimensions, I view it as like layers of an onion. So each dimension is a different layer, but it doesn't mean that some is better or worse. It's just that the perception is narrower or wider. And in first dimension, for example, that's a key dimension, because that's like the core of that onion, and that's where the most simplistic perception is found, and that's also the key to our source, to our inner portal, and to our source self, which is connected to the source of the absolute. So the source of the all-encompassing love, wisdom, and life creation, the source of the God with big G. So the absolute beautiful sense of oneness, where you don't have to be anything, but you are everything, and where, you know, that's like the central point, your center and the center of the existence as it is. I sometimes call it zero dimension, that central point, like the 0 point, and that's actually like the gateway to all the other broader dimensions. So it's much easier to travel to the broader dimensions through that source, through that 0 dimension, let's say, and first dimension, than like always going higher and higher, because then you can get more easily lost. And for us in 3D, the 2D world and the first D worlds are more accessible because they're closer to us. But then, for example, in 6th dimension, I've encountered beings that already create even worlds for others, not just for themselves. So they're really like creators of realities. So the gods, or creators with small g, the creators of different parallel 3D universes, for example, or different parallel worlds in the 5th dimension, where, you know, the space is different. There's not this sense of space like here in the 3D universe or space. But then there is, you know, the 3D worlds have different densities. I found like different parallel worlds have different density. And it's interesting because I feel like it's often confused, like in spiritual circles, people would say sometimes higher density, but that to me never made sense, because higher density is that something is more dense. It's actually very material. Our world is very high density. And for example, the fairy realm that I often go to, or the elven realm, is lower density, because it's not as solid. It's more light based. It's more fluid, let's say. So the worlds have different densities and also different vibrations. Vibration is how, and in this case, I would use the hierarchy of lower, higher, because there are worlds that are really low vibrational. There are kind of like hellish places, even more low vibrational than this world. And then there are places that are more high vibrational. So for example, the elven realms are quite high vibrational, or the angelic places. The angelic spheres are high vibrational, but lower density, because they have less dense worlds. They're more light based. So that's, I feel like that's, for me, that's how I kind of structure it for myself in my 3D brain, to be able to understand the different terminologies.